Most parents think babies cry because something is wrong, but sometimes babies cry because their tiny nervous system is overwhelmed in ways adults don't even notice. And once you understand this, your baby's crying starts making a lot more sense. Because a baby can be fed, changed, burped, held, and loved deeply, and still cry. Not because you're failing. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because for babies, the world can feel too loud, too bright, too fast, and too overwhelming. So, if you've ever stayed awake at night wondering, why won't my baby calm down? What am I missing? This video may completely change the way you understand your baby's tears tonight, because what if your baby's crying isn't always a problem to fix, but sometimes a nervous system asking for help feeling safe? If you've ever stood in the middle of the room at 2 in the morning, holding your baby close, rocking back and forth, whispering softly, trying everything you can think of, and your baby is still crying, then you know how helpless that moment can feel. The room is quiet. Your arms are tired. You've already fed them, changed them, burped them, held them, and still. The crying continues. That's usually the moment when a dangerous thought quietly enters a parent's mind. What am I doing wrong? But here's what most parents never get told early enough. A baby crying does not automatically mean you failed to meet their needs. Sometimes it means their tiny nervous system has simply reached its limit. And once you understand that, everything starts looking different. Because babies are not just reacting to hunger or diapers. They're reacting to the entire experience of being alive. The lights, the sounds, the movement, the temperature, the faces, the touching, the transitions, the exhaustion. Imagine waking up in a world where literally everything is new. Every sound feels bigger. Every sensation feels stronger. Every discomfort feels urgent. That's what infancy is. And babies have only one way to say, "This is too much for me." They cry. That's why sometimes your baby seems completely fine, and then suddenly falls apart in seconds. Not because something dramatic happened, but because tiny stress kept stacking quietly in their body until they couldn't hold it anymore. And this is the part many parents misunderstand. The crying often starts after the overwhelm, not during it. That's why evenings can feel so confusing. Your baby may seem okay all day. Then suddenly around sunset, everything changes. The fussiness begins. Nothing works. They cry harder when you try to soothe them, and parents start panicking. Why is this happening every night? But for many babies, evenings are when accumulated stimulation finally crashes into an overtired nervous system. And once you see that pattern, you stop seeing your baby as difficult. You start seeing them as overwhelmed. That changes the way you respond. Instead of adding more stimulation, more bouncing, more talking, more lights, more movement, more attempts to distract, you begin simplifying the world around them. And surprisingly, that's often when babies finally start calming down, because overstimulated babies usually don't need more input. They need less noise, less light, less urgency, less energy coming at them all at once. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is make the world feel smaller again. A dim room, a slower voice, gentle swaying, one calm rhythm, one familiar heartbeat. And here's something fascinating most parents don't realize. Babies borrow regulation from you before babies can calm themselves. They calm through you, your breathing, your tone, your nervous system. That's why sometimes the harder you try to stop the crying, the more intense it becomes. Because your baby can feel the panic underneath the soothing, and this creates a painful cycle. Baby cries. You tense up, baby senses tension. Baby cries harder. Now both nervous systems are overwhelmed together, but the moment you slow down, the moment your shoulders soften, your breathing slows, your movements become gentler. Sometimes your baby begins settling too, not because you found a magic trick, but because safety itself is calming. And this explains something parents often notice but rarely understand. Sometimes your baby calms the second you stop trying so hard. That isn't failure, that's regulation. Now, of course, babies still cry for physical reasons too. Gas, for example, can completely change a baby's mood in minutes. A baby may feed peacefully, then suddenly tense their stomach, pull up their legs, turn red, and cry like something is terribly wrong. because to them it does feel terrible. Their digestive system is still immature. Even small discomfort can feel enormous inside a tiny body. And overtiredness? That's another huge one. This surprises so many parents. Tired babies often don't look sleepy. They look wired. They fight sleep, arch backward, cry harder, push away comfort, and parents accidentally miss the sleep window because the baby suddenly seems more awake instead of less. Then the nervous system gets overloaded, and now calming them becomes much harder. That's why sometimes your baby isn't fighting you, they're fighting overwhelm. And when parents understand this, their entire energy changes. They stop asking, "How do I make the crying stop immediately?" and start asking, "How do I help my baby feel safe while this passes?" That shift changes everything, because babies do not always need a perfect solution. Sometimes they simply need a calm person willing to stay with them through the storm, and honestly, that can be emotionally hard, especially when you're exhausted, especially when the crying lasts a long time, especially when everyone around you has opinions. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe you're spoiling them. Maybe hold them less. Maybe hold them more, and suddenly you're not just caring for a crying baby. You're carrying guilt, too. But hear this clearly. A crying baby does not mean you are a bad parent. Sometimes babies cry even when they are deeply loved, safely held, and fully cared for, because babies are human beings, not machines, and human. Nervous systems sometimes struggle, even tiny ones. That's why closeness matters so much. Sometimes your baby isn't asking for milk. They're asking for regulation, for familiarity, for warmth, for the sound of your heartbeat, because not long ago your baby lived in constant closeness. Then, suddenly, bright lights, cold air, empty space, loud sounds, separation. That transition is huge. So when your baby settles only on your chest, that is not manipulation, that is biology. You are the safest place they know. And yes, that can feel beautiful and exhausting at the same time. Both can be true. Now there's something else parents rarely hear. Not every cry needs to be fixed instantly. Sometimes babies cry because their nervous system is releasing tension, not because you missed something, not because you failed, but because crying itself can sometimes be part of how babies process overwhelm. Your job in those moments may not be to eliminate every tear immediately. Sometimes your job is simply to stay close enough that they don't feel alone inside it. That's a very different kind of parenting. And honestly, it's often the kind babies need most. Now, of course, there are times crying should be checked more carefully. If your baby suddenly sounds very different, has a fever, struggles feeding, has trouble breathing, vomits repeatedly, becomes unusually sleepy, or something in your gut feels wrong, trust that instinct and contact your pediatrician. Parents often sense when something feels different, and that matters, but for everyday crying, the kind that leaves parents confused at midnight, the answer is often gentler than we fear. Your baby is not trying to give you a hard time. Your baby is having a hard time. That single shift can completely change the way you respond tonight, because now, instead of seeing crying as proof you're failing, you begin seeing it as communication. A nervous system asking for support, a tiny human struggling with a very big world. And maybe the goal is not perfection. Maybe the goal is presence. Your arms, your rhythm, your calm voice, your willingness to stay. That matters more than parents realize, and one day, without even noticing when it happened, you'll start recognizing the cries. You'll hear one sound and think, "Oh, that's the tired cry," or "That's the overstimulated cry." And slowly, little by little, you and your baby will learn each other. That's what parenting often is. Not instant mastery, a relationship built, moment by moment, one hard night at a time, one tiny understanding at a time, one loving response after another. So, tonight, if your baby cries and you feel exhausted, and you wonder whether you're doing enough, pause for a moment and remember this. Your baby may not need a perfect parent right now. They may simply need a calm, safe presence while their tiny nervous system settles. And if you are there, holding them, comforting them, trying again, you are already doing something deeply important. You are helping your baby feel safe in a world that still feels overwhelming and that matters more than you know. If this helped you see your baby differently, tonight, subscribe for more gentle baby guidance and calm answers for the questions parents quietly carry. And remember this: the next time the crying starts, your baby is not giving you a hard time. Your baby is having a hard time. And your presence is helping more than you realize. And once you begin to understand that, something else starts making sense too. Sometimes the crying doesn't stop because the reason isn't happening right now. Sometimes the reason happened earlier. And this is where many parents miss what their baby is really trying to say. A baby can have a busy afternoon, lots of voices, lots of movement, maybe a skipped nap, maybe a little extra play, maybe visitors smiling, touching, talking. And for a while, everything seems fine. That's what makes it confusing. Because if your baby was overwhelmed, wouldn't they cry right then? Not always. Sometimes babies hold it together until their body simply can't anymore, and then later, when the room finally gets quiet, when the stimulation stops, when you think things should feel easier, that's when the crying begins. Have you ever noticed that? Your baby seems okay around people. Then later, at home, they suddenly become fussy, clingy, impossible to settle. That doesn't mean the problem started at home. It means their nervous system finally ran out of room. And once parents understand this, evenings stop feeling so mysterious, because late-day crying often isn't about one thing. It's about the whole day living inside a tiny body. And here's something practical you can try tonight. When the crying starts, instead of asking only, "What's wrong right now?" ask yourself, "What has today felt like for my baby?" That one question can change everything. Was there more noise than usual? More people? Less sleep? More movement? A different routine? Sometimes the answer is not in the moment. Sometimes the answer is in the buildup. And this matters because once you recognize the buildup, you can start protecting your baby before they hit that wall. Not by making life silent, not by walking on eggshells, just by noticing. If your baby had a busy morning, maybe the afternoon needs to be quieter. If the day feels full, maybe bedtime needs to begin a little earlier. If naps were short, maybe don't add extra stimulation just because they seem awake. Most parents don't realize this, but prevention often feels much gentler than trying to recover from overwhelm later. And there's another clue babies give that many parents overlook: the way they look away. You might be talking softly, smiling, trying to engage, trying to distract them from fussiness, and suddenly they turn their face. Many parents think, maybe they're upset with me, but babies often look away because they need less input, not more. That tiny head turn can be your baby saying, "I need a little break." That is communication. That is not rejection. And honestly, once you start seeing those little signals, crying begins to feel less random. You notice the yawns, the stare, the jerky movements, the rubbing eyes, the sudden stiff body, the little frantic movements of hands and feet. Those are often early whispers before the loud crying comes, and this is important. If you respond during the whisper, you may not have to fight the storm. That's one of the most useful things parents can learn. Now let's talk about something that feels surprisingly small, but matters more than people think. Transitions. Babies often struggle with transitions, from awake to asleep, from warm bath to cooler air, from your arms to the crib, from one room to another, from feeding to burping, from calm to stimulation. For adults, these things feel tiny. For babies, transitions can feel abrupt. That's why some babies cry right after what should have been soothing: a bath, then crying, a feed, then crying, a cuddle, then crying. It can feel confusing, but often the crying is not because the soothing failed, it's because the transition felt too sudden. So one gentle thing that helps is slowing the transitions down. After a feed, don't rush. After a bath, hold them close a little longer before putting them down. Let your body become the bridge. That extra minute can matter. Sometimes a baby isn't resisting the next step. They just need help arriving there. And while we're here, there's something parents often wonder quietly: why does my baby cry more? with me than with other people? That can hurt, especially when someone else picks them up and they settle. You might think, why not me? But here's something beautiful most parents don't realize. Babies often release more with the person they feel safest with. With strangers or less familiar people, they may stay more alert. With you, they let go. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It often means your baby trusts you enough to unravel. That crying in your arms can feel personal, but sometimes it's actually trust. And if you needed to hear that tonight, hold on to it. Now, let's talk about feeding for a moment, because feeding can be trickier than it looks. Sometimes babies cry at the breast or bottle, and parents assume they must still be hungry. Sometimes, yes, but not always. Sometimes they are frustrated by fast flow, sometimes slow flow, sometimes they're tired, sometimes they swallowed air, sometimes they want comfort, but not more milk. And this is the part that gets exhausting, because the cry sounds urgent, and you naturally want to solve it quickly. But here's a helpful thing. When feeding doesn't seem to help, pause before immediately offering more. Watch. Your baby, are they gulping, pulling away, arching, clenching, turning their head? Sometimes the body tells you more than the cry, and those little observations can save you from guessing blindly. Now, there's another reason babies cry that can feel almost invisible. They're learning. Yes, learning. That may sound strange, but every single day your baby's brain is changing. New sounds, new visual patterns, new sensations, new internal feelings. Growth is not always quiet. Sometimes a developing brain can make a baby fussier, clingier, more sensitive, and parents often think something changed. Yes, something did change. Your baby is growing, and growth can temporarily make regulation harder. That doesn't mean anything is wrong. It means development can feel messy from the inside. And here's the surprising part. Sometimes babies cry more right before a leap in development, before longer stretches of alertness, before new movements, before more awareness. It's not always obvious in the moment, but later, parents often look back and realize that hard week came right before something new. Now, let me give you something practical that can help right away. When your baby is crying and nothing seems to work, try this simple reset. First, reduce the world, lower the lights, turn off extra sounds, stop switching positions every few seconds, choose one steady movement, one steady rhythm. Then, check yourself, not just the baby, you. How fast are you breathing? How tight are your shoulders? How urgent do your movements feel? Because babies feel that. And when you soften, sometimes they begin softening too. Not always immediately, but often more than you expect. And this is important. Don't judge a soothing method too quickly. Parents often try something for 15 seconds and think, it's not working. But nervous systems don't always calm instantly. Sometimes your baby needs time to trust the pattern. That's why steady often works better than constantly changing. Slow sway for 2 minutes may do more than 10 different tricks in 30 seconds. Consistency feels safer than surprise. Now here's something that can really help on hard nights. Try not to make crying the enemy. I know that sounds strange. Of course you want it to stop. Of course it pulls at your heart. But the moment crying becomes something you must defeat immediately, your body often fills with pressure, and babies feel pressure. Instead, think of crying as information, not failure, not emergency by default. Information. That shift can make your whole body respond differently. Instead of panic, curiosity. Instead of make it stop, what might my baby be telling me? That's a very different energy, and babies notice energy. Now I want to talk about one of the hardest parts, the emotional part. No one prepares parents for. The loneliness. Because when a baby keeps crying, especially at night, the whole world can feel very small. You may have noticed how quiet the house feels, how loud the crying feels inside your chest, how long 10 minutes can feel, how even if people love you, you can still feel strangely alone in that moment. Many parents go through this more than they say, and if you've ever felt tears in your own eyes while trying to calm your baby, that does not mean you're weak. It means you care deeply. It means you're tired. It means you're human. Sometimes parents think they have to stay endlessly patient, But real parenting often looks more honest than that. It looks like loving your baby and feeling overwhelmed. It looks like needing a moment. It looks like trying again, and trying again matters. Now, here's a gentle piece of advice that helps more than people expect. Create one calming ritual that becomes familiar, not something complicated, just something repeatable. Maybe dim lights, maybe a soft phrase you always say, maybe the same gentle sway, maybe a quiet walk across the room. Why does that matter? Because babies learn patterns, and familiar patterns begin signaling safety before words ever could. Over time, that little ritual can become a message. You're safe. We've been here before. You're not alone. That can matter more than parents realize, and this is especially helpful during the evening. Because remember, evenings often aren't random. They're often accumulated overwhelm, meeting, tiredness. That means predictable calm matters even more. A slower house, a quieter voice, a gentler pace. Sometimes parents wait until the baby is already deeply upset before changing the environment. But if evenings are usually hard, start earlier. Protect the nervous system before it gets flooded. That one small shift can make nights feel very different. And here's another practical thing. Watch your baby's almost tired signs, not just the obvious tired signs. The obvious signs often come late, crying, rubbing eyes, fighting everything. That can mean the window is already closing. The earlier signs are softer, a blank stare, less engagement, a slower body, small fussiness. That's often your moment. Catch that moment, and bedtime may feel much easier. Miss it. And now, you may be soothing an overtired nervous system instead of simply guiding a sleepy baby. That's not failure. That's learning timing, and parents get better at timing with practice. Now let me say something many parents need to hear. You do not have to understand every cry immediately. You really don't. Sometimes understanding comes later. Sometimes you realize afterward, oh, they were overtired. Oh, that was too much stimulation. Oh, that was gas. You are not supposed to know everything instantly. You are learning someone brand new, and your baby is learning life itself. Of course it feels messy sometimes. Of course. It feels uncertain. That uncertainty does not mean you are doing it badly. It means you are in the middle of real parenting. And over time, the confusion becomes less sharp. Not because babies stop needing things, but because you begin hearing what they're saying a little more clearly. That takes time. And it's okay if you're still in the early part of learning. Now, imagine tonight, your baby starts crying. Instead of your heart immediately racing, imagine pausing just a little. You lower the light. You soften your shoulders. You think about the day. You notice the signs. You stop trying 10 things at once. You become steady. And maybe the crying doesn't stop instantly, but maybe it softens. Maybe the pauses get longer. Maybe the body unclenches. Maybe your baby melts just a little. And even if that doesn't happen right away, something else important is still happening. Your baby is not alone in the overwhelm. That matters more than parents sometimes understand. Because babies are not only learning how to be comforted, they are learning what comfort feels like. Through your voice, through your rhythm, through your presence. That lesson stays long after the crying ends. And one day, not today maybe, but one day, you'll realize the nights that once felt impossible have changed. The cry that once felt mysterious becomes familiar. The panic becomes understanding. The helplessness becomes confidence. Not perfect confidence, but enough. Enough to breathe, enough to trust yourself a little more, enough to know. We've gotten through this before, and you will get through this too. So tonight, if your baby cries and you don't know exactly why, remember this. Sometimes it isn't hunger. Sometimes it isn't a diaper. Sometimes it isn't something broken that needs fixing. Sometimes it is simply a tiny nervous system saying, the world feels like too much right now. And in that moment, your baby may not need perfect answers. They may need a smaller world, a softer voice, a slower rhythm, a safer feeling. And if you can offer that, even while feeling tired, even while still learning, even while wondering if you're doing enough, you are already giving your baby something deeply important.